Iran offers money to abduct American women. Drones in the air. Drones in the air. Right now, somewhere over the Strait of Hormuz. A bounty has been placed, not on soldiers, not on assets, on women. American women. And the price doubles if she's taken alive. While Tehran issues this offer, drones are already moving. Missiles are already in the sky. And a question is left hanging over every American watching this right now. Who is next? And how far? Is Iran actually willing to go? Stay with us, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything. Welcome back to the Siege War, the place where the world's most dangerous flashpoints are broken down piece by piece, so you always know what's really happening. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask you for something. Not a favor, really. Think of it more like sitting down next to an old friend and saying, "Hey, would you mind pulling up a chair a little closer?" That's all subscribing is. It costs you nothing, it takes 2 seconds, and it means the next time something like this happens, you're not scrambling to find us. You're already here, already informed, already ahead of it. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Let it be your way of saying, I want to stay in the room for this. And one more thing. I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. It always amazes me how far this story travels, and how many corners of the world are watching the same crisis unfold together. Now, let's get into it. It began with a single statement. A senior Iranian military commander stood before cameras and announced something that stunned analysts across the region. His name is Amir Hatami. He holds a senior position inside Iran's armed forces. And on this day, he made an offer that few expected to hear out loud. He said Iran would pay a bounty for the capture or killing of American forces. The number he gave was $30,000, or in Iranian currency, 5 billion toman. That alone would be alarming. But then came the second part of his statement, the part that changed everything. He said the reward would double if the target captured was a woman. $60,000 for one American woman, taken alive. Analysts who study Iran's messaging closely say this was not a random detail. It was deliberate. Military planners rarely double a financial incentive without a reason. And in this case, the reason appears to be strategy, not chance. Experts explain that a female hostage carries a different kind of value. Not military value, propaganda value. Images of a captured woman travel faster online. They generate more emotional reaction, more fear, more attention. For a regime that relies heavily on psychological pressure, that reaction is the goal. This is not the first time Iran has used hostage-taking as a tool. Decades ago, the world watched the Iran hostage crisis unfold, when American citizens were held for over a year. Now, a new generation is being told the same tactic may return. Only this time, the target appears more specific. American women, civilians and personnel alike. The announcement did not stay isolated. It came packaged with other warnings. Reports say Iran has also discussed plans involving sleeper cells, groups that could, in theory, operate quietly inside the United States. No independent confirmation has verified the scale of this claim, but the mention alone was enough to raise concern among security analysts, because even the suggestion of coordinated cells on American soil changes how seriously a bounty announcement gets taken. For ordinary citizens, the message lands differently than a policy briefing. It becomes personal. A woman traveling abroad, a military spouse stationed overseas, a journalist covering the region, all of them suddenly forced to ask a new question. Am I now a target? Security specialists who track threats like this say the bounty itself may never be paid. Many such announcements are symbolic, designed to intimidate rather than to be executed. But they warn against dismissing it entirely, because history shows that regimes willing to say this publicly have, in some cases, acted on similar threats before. The bounty was framed as a reward, but underneath it lies something else, a tool of pressure, aimed not just at soldiers or officials, but at the psychology of an entire nation watching from home. As the statement spread, it did not stay confined to military circles. It moved into public conversation, into news coverage, into the fears of families with loved ones stationed abroad, and it left behind one central unanswered question. If Iran is willing to say this out loud, what else is it already planning quietly behind closed doors? That question sets the stage for what comes next, because the bounty announcement, disturbing as it is, was only one part of a much larger picture unfolding across the region. The bounty announcement did not happen in isolation. It landed in the middle of a region already on edge. Within hours, new reports began surfacing from the Strait of Hormuz, one of the busiest and most sensitive waterways on Earth. Missiles were reported launched into the strait, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. Analysts monitoring the situation say the full outcome of these launches remains unclear. No confirmation, at this stage, on whether they struck anything, but the activity itself sent a signal. A day later, something else appeared in the sky. Iranian drones, specifically a model known as the Shahed 136. Multiple units launched from southern Iran. Their apparent target, vessels moving through the strait. Analysts note that even unverified strikes carry weight in this region, because the strait is not just water, it is one of the world's most critical oil transit routes. Any disruption there ripples far beyond the Middle East. It touches fuel prices, shipping insurance, global markets. While this was unfolding at sea, another development was taking shape in the air. Reports pointed to activity inside Lebanon, explosions, the sound of fighter jets overhead. Some analysts link this to expanded operations tied to Israeli forces. Though full details remain difficult to confirm in real time, what is clear is that multiple fronts were now active at once: missiles in the strait, drones over shipping lanes, explosions in aircraft over Lebanon. Layered together, these events painted a picture far larger than a single bounty announcement. Then came another data point. Reports, still disputed among regional media outlets, described a U.S. Navy aircraft, a maritime patrol plane known as the P-8, spotted operating near an Iranian oil tanker. Some outlets suggested this could signal a coming operation, possibly involving the seizure of the tanker. Other reports pushed back on that idea entirely, describing the mission instead as search and rescue, nothing more. At the time of reporting, no side had confirmed the true purpose. Analysts caution that this kind of ambiguity is common in modern conflict zones, where information moves fast, but confirmation moves slower. Still, the presence of American surveillance aircraft near Iranian assets is notable on its own. It shows a level of monitoring that has not eased, despite public statements from Tehran. Which brings analysts to a pattern worth highlighting. Iranian officials have repeatedly claimed, publicly, that American forces have been pushed out of the region, that the United States no longer holds meaningful presence nearby. But observers monitoring the airspace and waters around Iran describe a very different reality. American fighter jets continue operating in the area. Armed helicopters patrol nearby islands. Warships remain positioned throughout the Gulf. Large-scale bombing campaigns may have paused, but a reduced tempo is not the same as a withdrawal. Analysts stress this distinction matters, because the gap between what Iranian leadership states publicly and what satellite and flight data actually show has grown wider in recent weeks. This is why security researchers say every statement coming out of Tehran now deserves close scrutiny. Not blind acceptance, not outright dismissal either, simply careful verification. Because in a region this volatile, a single unverified claim can shape public fear just as powerfully as a confirmed one. By the end of this stretch of activity, one thing becomes difficult to ignore. The bounty on American women was not a standalone threat. It was one piece inside a much larger and more active military picture. Missiles, drones, aircraft, disputed reports of naval movement, all converging in the same narrow window of time. Which raises the next question analysts are now focused on. If this is the visible activity, what does the region's actual military balance look like beneath the surface? Every claim needs a test. And Tehran's boldest claim, right now, is simple: that American power has been pushed out of the region, that the United States no longer holds real ground near Iran. Analysts decided to check that claim against the evidence. What they found tells a very different story. Start with the skies, above southern Iran, above the Persian Gulf, above the Strait of Hormuz. American combat aircraft are still flying, not occasionally, nearly around the clock. Fighter jets moving freely through airspace Iran claims to control. Armed helicopters patrolling near contested island chains, watching ships, watching movement, watching for exactly the kind of activity described in Part 2. None of this looks like a military in retreat. Now look at the water. 2 aircraft carriers remain positioned in the region. Alongside them, a broader fleet of warships. Missile launch positions spread across the Gulf. Analysts describe this posture in one word: ready, not passive, not withdrawn. Ready to respond at any moment if the situation escalates further. This is where the gap becomes impossible to ignore. On one side, Iranian leadership stands before cameras and declares victory, says the enemy has been driven out, says the region now belongs to them. On the other side, flight patterns, naval positioning, and verified troop movement tell a different truth entirely. Analysts who track military posture for a living say this contradiction is not new. Regimes under pressure often lean on strong public language, even when the facts on the ground don't support it. But the distance between the two, in this case, has grown wider than usual, and that distance matters, because it shapes how seriously outside observers take Iran's other claims, including the bounty announcement itself. If Tehran is willing to overstate its military position so openly, how much of its other messaging deserves the same scrutiny? There is one area, however, where the picture is more complicated. The large-scale bombing campaign that once defined the conflict has slowed. Analysts confirm that much. Fewer large strikes, less visible offensive action. But they are quick to draw a line here. A pause in bombing is not the same as withdrawal. It is not the same as surrender. It is more likely a shift in tactics. away from open confrontation, toward pressure campaigns like bounties, drone activity, and psychological messaging. This shift is part of why the bounty on American women carries extra weight. It fits a pattern. When direct military confrontation slows, other forms of pressure tend to rise. Threats, propaganda, attempts to instill fear inside the civilian population of the opposing side. Security analysts describe this as a deliberate substitution, replacing costly, visible military action with cheaper, harder-to-trace psychological tactics. Meanwhile, American assets remain positioned exactly where they would need to be if the situation shifted back toward direct conflict. That detail alone tells its own story. Preparedness has not decreased. If anything, it has remained constant, even as the nature of the threat has changed shape. For everyday viewers following this conflict, the takeaway is simple. Do not judge the situation by public statements alone. Judge it by what can be observed. Aircraft in the sky, ships in the water, verified movement, not declared victory. By that measure, the United States has not gone anywhere, and Iran knows it, which may explain why its messaging has shifted, in recent days, towards something harder to counter with military force alone. Fear, uncertainty, the threat of a hostage rather than the threat of a battlefield. Because a battlefield can be met with ships and jets. A bounty on a civilian's life is a different kind of war entirely, one fought in headlines, in comment sections, in the minds of people thousands of miles from the Gulf. And that, according to analysts, is exactly the point. Every threat eventually leads to the same question. What happens if it becomes real? If Iran actually attempts to capture an American woman? The consequences would not stay contained to one incident. Legal experts describe hostage-taking as one of the most serious violations under international law, a direct breach of long-standing global agreements. Any government caught orchestrating it opens itself to severe consequences, sanctions far beyond what already exists, diplomatic isolation on a wider scale, and potentially direct military response. History offers a clear warning here. Decades ago, American citizens were held inside Iran for over 400 days. That single event shaped U.S.-Iran relations for a generation. It defined how the world viewed the regime for years afterward. Analysts say a new hostage crisis, especially one built around a public bounty, would carry even heavier consequences today. The world is more connected now. Information moves faster. A captured American woman would not stay a quiet, contained story. It would dominate headlines within hours. It would pressure governments to act, publicly and quickly. That pressure cuts both ways. For the United States, failing to respond firmly could be seen as weakness, something few administrations could accept, regardless of political leaning. For Iran, following through on the bounty could trigger a response far larger than the act itself. Security analysts widely agree on this point. A single hostage situation, if confirmed, could escalate the entire regional conflict overnight, moving it from limited strikes and posturing into direct, large-scale confrontation. This is why many analysts believe the bounty may function primarily as psychological pressure, a message rather than an operational plan designed to instill fear, to pressure American citizens abroad into caution or withdrawal, to generate global headlines without requiring a single action. But analysts are careful not to fully dismiss the possibility either, because regimes that make threats publicly sometimes do so to test reactions, to see how much fear they can generate, before deciding whether to escalate further. Looking ahead, experts outline a few possible paths. The first, and most likely according to current analysis, is continued pressure without direct action. More statements, more drone activity, more missile tests, all designed to maintain tension without crossing into open hostage-taking. The second path involves further escalation, but still short of the bounty being acted upon. More incidents like the disputed tanker situation, more ambiguous naval movements, each one raising the stakes slightly, without a single clear trigger event. The third path is the most serious, an actual attempt to capture an American citizen tied directly to this bounty. Analysts describe this scenario as possible, but not currently the most probable outcome. Still, they stress that low probability does not mean no risk. For everyday viewers, the outlook translates into a few practical points. American military presence in the region remains strong and unlikely to change quickly. Iranian rhetoric will likely continue outpacing Iranian action based on current patterns. But the specific targeting of American women adds a layer of risk that did not exist in earlier phases of this conflict. That shift alone justifies heightened caution, especially for anyone with ties to the region, whether through travel, deployment, or family connections. Analysts recommend watching a few key indicators moving forward. Any reports of an actual attempted capture, any expansion of the bounty into new regions or targets, any significant change in U.S. military posture, either reinforcement or withdrawal. Each of these would signal a meaningful shift in how seriously the threat should be treated. For now, the situation remains what analysts call an active pressure campaign. Loud, alarming, but not yet crossing into direct action. That line, however, is thin. And as missiles continue testing the strait, as drones continue moving overhead, and as rhetoric continues sharpening on both sides, that line may not hold for much longer. The coming days, according to nearly every analyst tracking this story, will determine whether this remains a war of words or becomes something far more dangerous,